My name is Leo. I'm 25 and I fix things. It's what I do. It's who I am. My hands understand wood and metal, the logic of a loose joint or a stripped screw. They know how to make things right again. People, on the other hand, are a different kind of broken, and I don't have the tools for that. I lived alone in the house my grandfather built on the edge of Burlington, a small salt box with good bones that he'd let sag over the years. I was slowly bringing it back, one plain board and one plumbed wall at a time. The smell of sawdust was my cologne. The ache in my shoulders at the end of the day was my version of a lullaby. My routine was a simple one, built on the kind of predictability that keeps the world from feeling like it's about to spin off its axis. I woke with the first gray light, made coffee in a French press that was older than I was, and sat on the unfinished porch, watching the Vermont sky turn from bruised purple to a soft, hopeful blue. Then it was to the workshop in the garage, a place where every hammer and chisel had its place. I'd lose hours in there, shaping raw lumber into furniture. The scream of the table saw the only voice I needed to hear. My relationships had been like poorly built cabinets, functional for a short time, but they never lasted. The joints were never quite right. I was better with things than I was with people. Things were honest. You knew where you stood with a warped 2x4. I was content in that quiet, self-imposed isolation. It was a life measured in 80 grit sandpaper and the satisfying click of a socket wrench. I didn't need much more. Or so I told myself. My sister, Sarah, thought otherwise. She lived in Boston, worked a job with spreadsheets and conference calls, and believed my solitude was a problem to be solved, a leaky faucet in the plumbing of my life. She called every Tuesday, her voice a little too bright, a little too full of concern. It was on one of these calls that she sprang her trap. "I set you up with someone, Leo," she'd said, the words tumbling out before I could build a defense. "She's a friend of a friend. Her name is Jessica. She's nice. A teacher. Just go. For me. Please." I hated the idea. The small talk, the awkward silences, the pressure to be someone I wasn't. Charming, witty, a man who knew how to carry a conversation beyond the merits of different wood stains. But the pleading in Sarah's voice was a tool I didn't know how to work against. So I agreed. 1 coffee. 1 hour. A cafe downtown called The Daily Grind. Friday at 7. Table 12. Just words, but they felt like a sentence. Friday came wrapped in a damp, chilly mist that clung to the trees. I put on a clean flannel shirt, one that didn't have any holes or paint splatters, and ran a hand through my hair. It didn't help much. I felt like a floorboard that had been sanded against the grain, rough and out of place. The cafe was warm, smelling of dark roast coffee and steamed milk. It was crowded, a low hum of chatter filling the space. I scanned the room, my eyes searching for table 12. I saw the little placard near the back, by a window slick with rain. A woman was sitting there alone, staring into a mug held between her hands. She didn't look like the Jessica I had pictured. Sarah's friends were usually bright and bubbly, like her. This woman was still. She was older than me, maybe in her late 30s, with intelligent eyes that seemed to be looking at something far beyond the rain-streaked glass. She was black, with her hair pulled back in a simple, elegant way that exposed the graceful line of her neck. She wore a soft gray sweater that looked comfortable and warm. There was a quiet strength about her, but also a tension in her shoulders, a weariness around her eyes. I figured this was her. Jessica, just as nervous as I was. I walked over, my boots making a soft, clumsy sound on the worn wooden floor. "Jessica?" I asked, my voice feeling rusty from disuse. She looked up, and her eyes, a deep, warm brown, widened in surprise. There was a flicker of confusion, then something else I couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice softer than I expected. "I'm Leo, Sarah's brother," I explained, feeling my cheeks grow warm. I gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Is this table 12? A slow smile touched her lips, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a polite smile, a shield. "It is," she said, her gaze shifting for a moment toward the door, a flicker of anxiety in her expression. She looked back at me. "Please sit." I sat, placing my hands on the small, round table. They felt too big, too calloused for the delicate setting. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the cafe filling the space between us. I was trying to think of something to say, something about the weather or the coffee, the usual useless currency of first meetings. Before I could assemble the words, her attention was snagged by the front door again. Her posture straightened, and the polite smile vanished, replaced by a look of profound dread. A man was walking in, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that looked too expensive for a small Vermont town. He scanned the room with an air of ownership, his eyes landing on our table. The woman across from me took a sharp breath. She looked from the man back to me, her eyes wide with a sudden, desperate panic. Without a word of warning, she leaned across the table, closed the small distance between us, and kissed me. It wasn't a passionate kiss. It was brief, firm, and tasted faintly of coffee and fear. It was a statement, a smokescreen. My mind went completely blank, stuttering like a misfired nail gun. All I could feel was the unexpected softness of her lips and the cold shock of surprise. She pulled back just as the man in the suit arrived at our table. Her hand came to rest on mine, her fingers cool and trembling slightly. "Darling," she said, her voice miraculously steady as she looked up at him. "I'm a little busy right now." The man's arrogant face clouded with confusion and anger. He looked from her to me, his gaze dismissive and sharp. I just sat there, a piece of lumber in a place it didn't belong, my heart hammering against my ribs. He sputtered for a moment, opened his mouth to say something, then seemed to think better of it. He gave her one last, venomous look, turned on his heel, and strode out of the cafe, the little bell on the door chiming angrily behind him. The woman let out a long, shuddering breath, and the tension seemed to drain out of her all at once. She slumped back in her chair, closing her eyes for a second. She pulled her hand away from mine. "I am so sorry," she whispered, opening her eyes again. They were filled with a mixture of embarrassment and relief. That was inexcusable. That was my ex-husband. Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey Leo, it's Jessica. So sorry, running about 15 minutes late. I'm at table 9, the one by the fireplace. See you soon." I looked at the text. I looked at the little placard on our table. It wasn't a 12. The screw holding it in place had loosened, and the 2 had swiveled upside down. It was table 17. I had sat at the wrong table. I looked back at the woman, this stranger who had just kissed me to fend off her past. A slow, stupid realization dawned on me. I said, my voice barely a croak, that I'm at the wrong table. Her tired, worried face broke, not into a smile, but into genuine, unrestrained laughter. It was a beautiful sound, like the ringing of a perfectly tuned bell. It transformed her face, erasing the weariness and leaving only warmth. She laughed until tears shone in her eyes. I couldn't help but smile myself, the absurdity of the situation washing over me. When her laughter finally subsided, she wiped a tear from the corner of her eye and looked at me, her expression soft and sincere. "Thank you," she said, her voice still trembling with mirth. She took a deep, calming breath. "Honestly, this is the best moment I've had in years." Her name was Althea. She was a book editor who had moved to Burlington 6 months ago to escape the noise of New York City and the wreckage of her marriage. I never made it to table 9. I texted Jessica, apologized for a sudden emergency, and stayed right where I was. We talked for 2 hours. It wasn't the forced, awkward conversation of a blind date. It was easy. She asked about the calluses on my hands, and I told her about my grandfather's house and the workshop. I told her how I was trying to build it back, piece by piece. She told me about the books she edited, the worlds made of words she helped shape. She spoke with a quiet passion that was mesmerizing. When the cafe started to empty out, I offered to walk her home. It turned out she lived only a few blocks from me, in one of the older Victorian houses on Maple Street. As we stood on her porch under the dim, yellow light, the damp air smelling of wet leaves and rain, I noticed the handrail was loose, pulling away from the post. My hands itched to fix it. "That railing is loose," I said, the observation leaving my mouth before I could stop it. "It's a hazard." Althea looked at it, then back at me, a small, curious smile on her lips. "It is," she agreed. "The whole house is full of little problems like that. It's why I got it for a decent price. I could fix it for you," I offered. "It wouldn't take long. Just need to anchor it properly." She studied my face for a long moment, her gaze thoughtful. "I couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering," I said. I like fixing things. It was the truest thing I could say. She finally nodded. All right, Leo the handyman. When would you be able to do that? How about tomorrow? I said. Around 10. Tomorrow at 10, she confirmed, her smile a little warmer this time. I'll make coffee. True to her word, when I arrived the next morning with my toolbox, a thermos of steaming black coffee was waiting for me on the porch steps. The air was crisp and clean after the rain. I set to work, my movements sure and practiced. I removed the old, rusted lag bolts, drilled new pilot holes, and secured the railing with heavy-duty fasteners, sinking them deep into the support post. It was a simple job, but I took my time, making sure it was solid, that it wouldn't wobble or give way. I liked the feeling of making something safe and dependable. Althea came out and watched me for a while, leaning against the doorframe with her mug. She didn't say much, just observed, a quiet presence that wasn't distracting. It was comfortable. When I finished, I tested the railing, putting my full weight against it. It didn't budge. It was solid as rock. There, I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. That's not going anywhere. Thank you, Leo, she said, her voice soft with genuine gratitude. I've been meaning to call someone about that for months, she gestured with her mug. Can I offer you more coffee? And I made scones. That's how it started. The railing led to a sticking window in her study, the one that looked out over her overgrown garden. While I was carefully prying the swollen wood of the sash free, she brought me a tall glass of iced tea and told me about the author she was working with, a stubborn old poet who refused to change a single comma. I listened, sanding the edges of the window frame until it moved up and down with a smooth, satisfying whisper. A week later, it was a wobbly leg on the antique table in her dining room. It was a beautiful piece, dark cherry wood with intricate carvings, but one of the legs had come loose from its mortise. I spent an afternoon in her quiet house, carefully cleaning out the old glue, applying new wood glue, and clamping it tight to set. The house smelled of lemon polish and old paper. While the glue dried, she made us sandwiches, and we ate them at her kitchen counter. She asked me about my family, and I told her about Sarah's well-intentioned meddling. She laughed and told me about her own sister, a lawyer in Chicago who thought moving to Vermont was a sign of a mental breakdown. Our exchanges fell into a rhythm, a quiet routine of care. I would fix something broken in her physical world, and she would offer a small piece of comfort from hers: coffee, scones, a bowl of soup, a story. Each job was a new conversation. While fixing a leaky faucet under her kitchen sink, I learned she'd grown up in Ohio. While replacing a broken slate tile on her walkway, she learned that I'd never wanted to be anything other than a carpenter, just like my grandfather. I was careful not to pry into her past, not to ask about the man from the coffee shop. I figured she would tell me if she wanted to. My job was to fix the things she asked me to fix, the tangible problems of her house. The other things, the broken parts one couldn't see, were not my place. But I started to notice how the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease when I was around. She smiled more, the genuine, full-faced smile I'd seen a glimpse of that first night. One Saturday, I was building her some bookshelves. Her study was overflowing with books. They were stacked on the floor, on her desk, on every available surface. She needed a place for them. I had spent the week in my workshop, milling poplar boards, cutting dado joints, sanding them until they were as smooth as polished stone. I was assembling them in her study, the neat, precise work a deep source of satisfaction. The room was filled with the clean, sweet scent of the fresh-cut wood. Althea sat in her armchair, reading a manuscript with a red pen in her hand, occasionally looking up to watch me work. The silence between us was easy, a comfortable space filled only by the scrape of my screwdriver and the rustle of her pages. It felt more real, more connected than any of the stilted dates I'd been on in the past. We weren't trying to impress each other. We were just being. I was fitting the last shelf when I saw the car pull up through the window. A sleek, black sedan that oozed money and arrogance. My stomach tightened. I recognized it. It was the same car from the cafe. A moment later, the man himself was walking up the path, his stride confident and entitled. Marcus. Althea had told me his name once, in passing. Althea saw him too. I watched all the color drain from her face. The easy peace of the room evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating dread. She put her manuscript down, her hands trembling slightly. I'll handle this, she said, her voice a strained whisper. She stood up and walked to the front door before he had a chance to knock. I stayed where I was, but I stopped working, my hand resting on a heavy steel clamp on the floor beside me. I just listened. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" Althea's voice was cold, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. "Althea, baby, don't be like that." His voice was smooth, condescending. "I was just in the area for business. Thought I'd see how you were settling into your little country adventure. I'm settled, and I've asked you not to come here. We have nothing to talk about." "I disagree," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "I think we have plenty to talk about. Like this ridiculous idea that you can just walk away. We're not finished." "Yes, Marcus, we are." I heard the sound of the front door opening wider, the creak of the old hinges. I stood up and walked quietly to the doorway of the study. I could see them now. He had pushed his way into the entryway, crowding her space, one hand on the doorframe, as if to block her retreat. He was bigger than her, and he was using his size to intimidate, leaning into her personal space with a practiced ease that made my blood run cold. "Look at this place," he scoffed, his eyes scanning the hallway. "It's falling apart, just like you, without me to take care of you. Who's this now?" His eyes landed on me, standing in the doorway. He looked me up and down, taking in my work clothes, the sawdust on my jeans. A smirk played on his lips. "You hired help? Good. Maybe he can fix the peeling paint." Althea flinched at his words, a small, almost imperceptible movement. But I saw it. I saw the way he made her feel small. I didn't say anything. I just met his gaze, my expression flat. I didn't move. I didn't need to. My presence was enough to change the dynamic. I was a solid, physical fact in the room that he couldn't easily dismiss. "He's a friend," Althea said, her voice a little stronger now. She took a half step to the side, so she was standing closer to me, no longer trapped between Marcus and the wall. "And I need you to leave. Now." Marcus's eyes narrowed, flicking between us. He was reassessing. The situation was no longer a lone woman he could bully. "A friend?" he sneered. "This is who you replace me with? A boy who works with his hands." The insult was meant to sting, to diminish me, but it didn't land. Working with my hands was what I did. It was what I was proud of. I took a slow step forward, out of the study and into the hall. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a threat. I just stood there, a quiet wall between him and Althea. "She asked you to leave?" I said. My voice was low and even. It wasn't a request. He looked at me, a flicker of real anger in his eyes now. For a second, I thought he might push it, might try to prove his dominance with force. But he was a man who fought with words and money, not fists. He looked at my hands, calloused and capable. He looked at my steady gaze. He was a predator, and he recognized that this was no longer an easy hunt. He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Fine," he spat, his eyes locking on Althea. "Have your little rustic fantasy. You'll come crawling back when you realize you can't survive on your own." He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the quiet house, a final, petty act of violation. The silence he left behind was heavy and sharp. Althea stood completely still for a long moment, her back to me. I watched her shoulders rise and fall with a deep, shaky breath. Then, very slowly, she wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. "I'm sorry you had to see that," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. She wouldn't turn around. I knew she didn't want me to see her cry. "You have nothing to be sorry for," I said softly. She finally turned, and her eyes were glistening. The careful guard she always kept up was gone, shattered. In its place was a raw, aching vulnerability. It was the first time I had seen her completely undefended. "He was like that for years," she said, her voice barely audible. "Always making me feel like I was nothing without him. Like I was a project he had to manage, something broken he had to fix. I came here to get away from that, to prove to myself that I could stand on my own. And the minute he shows up, I just freeze. My first instinct was to fill the silence, to say something reassuring, to promise it would be okay. But that's what he would have done. He would have managed her feelings. So instead, I just stood there, giving her the space to feel what she was feeling. I was just a steady presence, a wall she could lean on if she chose to. I wasn't there to fix her. I was just there." After a long moment, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thank you, Leo," she said, her voice a little stronger. "For not saying anything." "Do you want me to go?" I asked. She looked at me, a deep, searching look. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Please, don't go." So I stayed. I finished assembling the bookshelves, the rhythmic turn of the screwdriver a steadying sound in the quiet house. Althea went back to her chair, but she didn't pick up her manuscript. She just watched me, her expression unreadable. When the shelves were finished, standing tall and solid against the wall, I began to fill them with her books, arranging the spines carefully. It felt like an act of restoration, of bringing order back to her space. She directed me, telling me which authors went where, her voice slowly regaining its usual calm. That evening, we sat on her front porch. The sun had set, and the air had grown cool, smelling of damp earth and distant wood smoke. The new railing was firm under my hand. The porch swing I hadn't built yet was just a space of empty air. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The street was quiet, the houses lit with a warm, inviting glow. "I never went on that blind date," I said finally, breaking the silence. The confession felt important, somehow. Althea turned to look at me, a faint silhouette in the twilight. "I figured," she said. "Jessica mentioned her date canceled because of an emergency." A small smile played on her lips. Was I the emergency? Sort of, I admitted, a corresponding smile touching my own face. A better one. We fell silent again, but the quiet had changed. It was charged with unspoken things. The pretense of our arrangement, the handyman and the homeowner, felt thin and transparent now. Marcus's visit had burned it away, leaving something more honest in its place. "Leo," she said, her voice soft. "Why do you keep coming over?" "To fix things." The question was direct, and it demanded an answer that went beyond simple neighborliness. I looked at my hands, resting on my knees. They knew how to build things, how to make them strong and true. But words were a different material, flimsy and hard to shape. "I like fixing things," I said, the old, true answer. "And I like the coffee." It felt inadequate, a poorly joined corner. She was quiet for a moment. "Was it just you being a good neighbor today?" "With Marcus?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Was that just an act?" I looked up from my hands and met her gaze in the dim light. Her eyes were searching for something, a truth I hadn't even fully admitted to myself. And in that moment, I was forced to confront it. My concern for her wasn't just about a loose railing or a sticky window. Coming here had become the anchor of my week. The smell of her house, the sound of her voice, the quiet comfort of her presence. It was something I had started to build my days around. I had been blind to the structure I was creating, focusing only on the individual planks and nails. "No," I said, the word coming out with more force than I intended. My heart was starting to beat a little faster, a steady, rhythmic hammering. It wasn't an act. The space between us seemed to shrink, the cool night air suddenly feeling warm. I realized that all this time, I thought I had been fixing her house. But really, I had been building a bridge. A bridge from my quiet, solitary island to hers. And I wasn't sure I ever wanted to go back. I've liked you for a long time, Althea," I said, the words feeling clumsy and strange in my mouth. "More than just a neighbor." She let out a soft breath, a sound of relief. "Good," she whispered, "because I'm starting to feel like my house is running out of broken things." A genuine laugh escaped me, breaking the tension. "I could probably find a few more," I offered. "Or," she said, her voice dropping a little, her gaze holding mine, "you could just come over for the coffee." That night was the turning point. The unspoken had been spoken, and the air between us was cleared, ready for something new to be built. The next day, I didn't show up with my toolbox. I showed up with 2 coffees from the daily grind and a bag of scones. We sat on her porch and just talked, like any 2 people getting to know each other. There was no project, no task to perform. The dynamic had shifted. It wasn't about service and reciprocation anymore. It was about presence. A few days later, I invited her to my place. I was hesitant. My house was a perpetual work in progress. The living room had drywall dust in the corners, and the kitchen was more functional than beautiful. But I wanted her to see my space, my world. Specifically, I wanted to show her the workshop. She walked into the garage, her eyes wide. She ran a hand over the smooth, worn surface of my workbench, touched the handle of a hand plane, and breathed in the scent of cedar and oil. "This is incredible, Leo," she said. "It's a sanctuary." She understood. She saw the care, the order, the love I poured into my craft. She looked at the half-finished rocking chair I was making from a single piece of reclaimed walnut, tracing the elegant curve of the armrest I had spent days shaping. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Seeing my world through her eyes made me see it differently. It wasn't just a messy workshop. It was a place of creation. My half-finished house wasn't a failure to complete a project. It was a space filled with potential. She didn't see the flaws. She saw the good bones, the solid foundation. We started spending most of our evenings together. We would cook dinner in her kitchen, which was much nicer than mine, or sit in my living room listening to old records on my grandfather's turntable. Her books started appearing on my empty shelves. A spare toothbrush of hers sat in a mug next to my sink. My favorite coffee mug found a permanent home on her counter. Our lives began to merge, the edges blurring in the most natural, unforced way. Our two houses sat side by side, separated by a rickety, vine-choked chain-link fence that had been there for decades. It was an eyesore, a remnant of a time when the properties were separate, when the people living in them were strangers. One Saturday morning, I was staring at it from my kitchen window while Althea made pancakes. "I hate that fence," I said. She came and stood beside me, following my gaze. "Me too," she said. "It's ugly, and it's in the way. I could take it down," I said. Her eyes lit up. "Could we do it together?" So we spent the day in the warm autumn sun, armed with bolt cutters and work gloves. We worked as a team, snipping the rusted metal ties, rolling up the heavy mesh, and digging the old metal posts out of the ground. It was hard work, sweaty and satisfying. We laughed as we struggled with a particularly stubborn post, finally freeing it from the earth with a triumphant heave. By late afternoon, the fence was gone. The 2 yards flowed into one, an open, shared space of green grass and falling leaves. The barrier, both literal and symbolic, was gone. We stood in the middle of the newly opened space, dirty and tired, looking at our two houses. They no longer felt like separate entities. They felt like a single homestead. "It's better," she said, her voice soft with satisfaction. "So much better." I turned to look at her. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair was a mess, and I had never seen anyone more beautiful. The late afternoon sun caught in her hair, turning it into a halo of gold and brown. All the guardedness I had first seen in her was gone, replaced by an open, trusting warmth that was directed entirely at me. "Yeah," I said, my voice a little thick. "It is." I stepped closer to her, and this time, there was no panic, no ex-husband, no confusion. There was only a quiet certainty that felt as solid and true as a mortise and tenon joint. I raised a hand and gently brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek. She leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a second. Then I leaned in and kissed her. It was nothing like the first time. This kiss was slow and deep and sure. It was a conscious choice, a deliberate act of building. It tasted of sunlight and hard work and the promise of a shared future. It was the first real nail, driven straight and true, into the foundation of whatever it was we were creating together. When we finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine, her hands on my chest. "So," she whispered, a smile in her voice, "what do we build next?" Months passed, and autumn bled into the quiet white of a Vermont winter, which then melted into the vibrant green of spring. Our shared yard came to life. We tilled a large patch of earth where the fence used to be and planted a garden. Althea, who knew about plants from her books, chose the vegetables and flowers. I built the raised beds from cedar that would weather to a beautiful silver gray. We worked the soil together, our hands in the dirt, planting seeds of tomato, cucumber, and basil. Our domestic routine was as comfortable as a well-worn flannel shirt. My tools found a permanent home in her garage, next to her car. Her ever-growing collection of books filled the shelves I had built her, and had also migrated to every surface of my house. We didn't talk about moving in together. It just happened. One night, she didn't go back to her house, and then she just kept not going back. Her house became her office, a quiet space for her editorial work, while my house became our home. One of my last projects for us, was a porch swing. I built it in my workshop from strong, straight-grained oak, sanding each piece until it felt like silk. I hung it on her porch, which was now our porch, anchoring it deep into the ceiling joists so it was safe and strong. It was the perfect size for two. It was a warm evening in early summer. We were sitting on that swing, moving in a slow, gentle rhythm, my arm around her shoulder. The fireflies were beginning to rise from the damp grass of our garden, their blinking lights a silent conversation in the twilight. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and the sweet perfume of the peonies blooming along the walkway. From inside the house, the low, mellow notes of an old jazz record drifted out through the open window. Althea leaned her head against my shoulder, her body relaxed and at ease next to mine. She held a book in her lap, but she wasn't reading it. She was just watching the fireflies, a soft, contented smile on her face. It was a perfect, quiet moment, built not on grand gestures, but on hundreds of small, ordinary days just like this one. "You know," she said, her voice a low murmur that blended with the music and the chirping of the crickets. "I used to think love was supposed to be this loud, complicated thing. A storm. Something that swept you away." She turned her head to look at me, her brown eyes full of a deep, calm affection that still made my heart skip a beat. "I spent so long trying to survive a storm. I thought about that. I thought about Marcus, with his expensive car and his loud, angry words. I thought about the life she had escaped from, a life of noise and drama and feeling small. I looked around at the world we had built. The solid porch, the thriving garden, the two houses joined by an open lawn. It was all quiet. It was all calm. It was all strong." I tightened my arm around her, pulling her a little closer. The swing creaked softly, a gentle, rhythmic sound. I looked at her face, illuminated by the warm lights spilling from the living room window, and I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was home. Not the house, not the town. Her. Us. This quiet moment. "I think it's just this," I said, my voice soft. I pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "Staying."